Welcome to the Intercourse Show. I'm your host, Mr. B. Today, we are discussing government shutdown, the 2025 government shutdown. As some of you know, the Democrats and the Republicans are at odds over the government spending plan and the funding that is necessary for that. Now, what's being held up is in the Senate where I believe there's like an 8-vote window where the Republicans need to get Democrats to side with the bill in order for it to go into effect so that Trump can sign it into law. But they are in an impasse. I think at the core is the issue of health care. Trump argues that the Democrats are trying to get health care provided for illegal immigrants. The Democrats are saying they just don't want Trump messing with anybody's health care as a whole. And they're holding it up. Now, for those of you who haven't been following politics, Trump has been pretty much trouncing Democrats pretty badly with regards to getting wins in the Supreme Court, with regards to pushing his agenda. And right now, the Democrats don't seem like they have a clear-cut leader who can articulate their point of view. So they do have an incentive to hold things up and to do anything in their power to make Trump look bad. But besides all of that, there are economic implications to the fact that the government is shut down. And what we're going to do in this video is analyze what those implications are. CNBC did a great little video, and I thought it'd be nice to share that with my viewers. So without any further ado, let's jump right into it.
Shutdowns are actually a bit more common than probably perceived. We've had 20 of these shutdowns. It's often just political brinksmanship.
I think is really simply a response to showing that they're willing to fight Trump.
The president's doing kabuki theater. He's threatening to fire a bunch of employees if we don't keep the government open.
Democrats are really trying to make this fight about health care, but Republicans are betting that they won't be successful, that people will just see Democrats as holding up a shutdown, potentially leading to a large-scale federal layoff. The fiscal year starts from October 1st and runs all the way until September 30th of next year. So every year on September 30th or around this time, there's a question whether or not the government is going to be funded.
We are going to give them every opportunity to vote for a clean CR.
For Republicans, it's a time to show that Democrats are blocking the way to keeping the government funded, trying to paint them as unreasonable.
We're spending about $7 trillion this year. I'm only talking about 25% of the budget, which is the discretionary spending. Obamacare is the root cause of all these problems. It is skyrocketing healthcare costs, insurance costs, and all Democrats want to do is throw more money at it. We want to bring down healthcare costs in a reasonable way.
Well, Democrats say the only way they are ever going to give Republicans the votes they need to keep the government open is through something on health care.
And what we know is that failure to extend those tax credits is going to see insurance costs rise for over 20 million people, and about 4 million people lose their health insurance entirely.
For the government to avoid a shutdown, you need 60 senators to vote for approving any sort of stopgap or funding bill. If you do the math, Republicans only have 53 Republican senators. That means they need at least 7 Democrats to join them. And frankly, because Rand Paul tends to vote no on these continuing funding bills, they're likely going to need 8 Democrats. Now, you have one already, John Fetterman, who has come out and said he doesn't think that a government shutdown is ever a good idea, that it ever helps people. And he has come out and supported the Republicans' legislation. But at this point, you don't have any other Democrats who have done so.
My guess is we probably will shut the government down.
This shutdown is a little bit different because we're seeing something that we've never seen before, which is the federal government not just saying that they will furlough federal employees, but they will actually fire and lay off federal employees who are considered non-essential. So the Office of Management and Budget, run by Russell Vought, came out with a memo to agencies just the other week saying, hey, as you furlough employees, consider whether or not you really need those roles and consider shrinking down your agencies so it's only essential employees, as well as programs and agencies that are in line with the president's agenda. Now, he didn't go into detail about exactly which agencies those would be, but we can guess based on what the priorities of the Trump administration have been. Probably means things like Customs and Border Protection, ICE, military, policing would all maintain funding levels and staff, or maybe things like, say, the Department of Education would be more at risk for cuts. Democrats have basically come out and said that this is nothing more than an intimidation tactic. They point out there have already been massive reductions in the federal workforce, and that Russell Vought doesn't need a government shutdown to ask agencies to lay off individuals. Meanwhile, you have seen the Supreme Court bring some initial rulings out that lay a path for the Trump administration to fire more workers. So there is more of a risk here if a shutdown does happen, because you could see a massive shrinkage in the size of government.
Those federal workers would be certainly impacted in a major way. If I look at the overall, economy, we're talking about 160 million people employed, over 160 million employed, and the federal workers, the ones that were potentially furloughed, is probably about 800,000. This big debate about the employment picture and inflation, and if we go into a government shutdown, some of that data releases, even the upcoming employment report, would potentially not come out. So all of a sudden, you have the Fed heading into a meeting with less information, which is already a difficult decision. I mean, I think what would happen is that the Fed would start looking even more on outside private data, but it certainly complicates things at a time where there's a lot of tension in the Fed's mandate and that employment versus the inflation side.
Yeah, obviously, it's a big deal for the government employees that are furloughed or fired, but from a broader economic perspective, not so much.
The economy tends to take a little bit of a short-term hit during the shutdown, and then there tends to be a rebound thereafter as well. So you're seeing the same picture play out in financial markets. When you look back historically, leading up, there tends to be a little bit of volatility, but during the actual shutdown, the market has actually been about flat.
When it comes to the FAA, airlines, you usually see longer lines for planes when a government shutdown is going on. The U.S. Travel Association estimated that during a shutdown, about $1 billion for the travel industry is lost a week. That's from flights, that's from rail, that's from people not visiting U.S. parks and national monuments, which are closed during a shutdown. Would it be smart for the government to avoid having to do shutdowns by automatically continuing funding when they get to this point? Probably. But much like the fiscal cliff and raising the debt ceiling, it takes away this key point of leverage that really forces lawmakers to sit down, come to the table, and hash out an agreement. Much like the debt ceiling and the debt limit, it's something that Congress is just going to continue to wrangle over year after year.
Okay, so there you have it. The government shutdown explained. Now, and some of the implications of it. Now, I think it's never a good thing. But Trump argues that he's going to have the flexibility to do some things that, had the shutdown now gone into effect, he wouldn't have, which is the ability to lay off more federal employees, which he's already making major cuts. Based on his earlier suggestion from Doge, some of these wasteful spending programs, there's a number of things where, they may not be use for those programs, and Trump can just take an axe and cut it down. And the Supreme Court did give him a decision that allows him to limit the size of government and save money. So that is something that is possible, because if his budget is constrained, what he'll start doing is to start taking it off the top with existing agencies that he doesn't think are necessary. I found another video actually that goes into more detail about this. It just explains a little more for people who don't understand how the government works. It explains a little more about that, and it allows people to see, to get a bigger picture of what's going on in that. So let me see if I can cue that up here, because I do believe that we should understand what's actually happening So this, I think, came out yesterday. And we'll go ahead and share this tab.
Well, we're going to see, but the radical left Democrats want to shut it down. I mean, it's up to them. We have a great economy going. You saw the numbers yesterday. They're fantastic. The economy's doing well. And you know what happened? The Democrats want to shut it down. And they want to shut it down because they want to give billions, ultimately trillions of dollars to illegal migrants, people that came into our country illegally. Some of those people are criminals, but they came into our country illegally. And they want to give them the essential over years, trillions of dollars. And our people aren't going to stand for it. They also want to have open borders. They want to have men and women's sports. They want to have transgender for everybody. These people are crazy, the Democrats. So if it has to shut down, it'll have to shut down. But they're the ones that are shutting down.
We'll continue to talk to the Democrats, but I think you could very well end up with a closed country for a period of time. And we'll take care of the military, we'll take care of Social Security, we'll take care of the things that we have to take care of. A lot of the things that Democrats fight for, which in many cases aren't very good things, will not be able to be paid.
Since he took office, President Trump has taken a meat axe to our healthcare system. It's vicious, it's cruel, it's mean. People are sicker, people live less long because of what Trump has done. $1 trillion in health care cuts, 15 million people kicked off health insurance, decimating rural health care systems, shuttering hospitals and clinics. Healthcare is less accessible and more expensive for millions of Americans. It was one of the great achievements of the last 2 decades. And Trump is undoing it with his Republican colleagues. And why are they doing all this? To give billionaires a tax break. We're now facing a cliff on ACA tax credits. Millions of Americans and small businesses who rely on the ACA premium tax credit are going to see their health care skyrocket, their costs. On average, premiums will increase a shocking, 93%, almost double if the tax credits expire. 24 million Americans, including about 5 million people who will lose their coverage entirely. And when it's 24 million Americans, it's many more people who are affected, because that's direct people. But what about their families and all of the people who depend on them? So it's a huge number of people.
Issue at this point. I've been hard at work the last couple of weeks preparing for a possible government shutdown. Our chief of staff has this as a major work stream. The good news is, again, we got a lot of sort of stuff that's on the shelf for how this works. We're in close coordination with other agencies, with other components of the federal government, and we're crunching the numbers right now to see how much funding does the FCC have, when exactly do we have to shut down if there's a lapse.
The U.S. is just hours away from a potential shutdown. The Congress has just a few hours left to avoid the disaster. But why is the U.S. government facing a shutdown? What does this mean for the U.S. economy?
Looking for an easier way to get that LLC next to your business name? Say hello to Taylor Brands. Just go to their...
Here's the latest. U.S. Democrats and Republicans have failed to reach a deal on averting a government shutdown. The U.S. Congress is thus locked in a continuing resolution to fund federal agencies past September 30. There is a difference between the House and Senate, notably in areas of health care funding and other program changes. Result, the current U.S. government funding expires on September 30. How likely is a shutdown? What is the possibility that Donald Trump's government may come to a standstill? Well, as of now, negotiations are unresolved and lawmakers have traded short extensions and demands. Several analysts believe that a shutdown is indeed possible if no compromise is reached before midnight of September 30. While political leaders have been saying that they intend to avoid a shutdown, an agreement over a continuing resolution is not in sight. Thanks to senators, as they are struggling to agree on spending levels, with some wanting to maintain current funding, even as others push for increased or decreased allocations. Moreover, the current political climate is such that there are significant partisan divisions within Democrats and Republicans to find common ground on a CR. There are internal divisions within the Democratic Party regarding funding levels for different sectors, such as healthcare, education, or defense.
We are ready, we are willing, we are able to find a bipartisan path forward and reaching a spending agreement that actually keeps the government open, but meets the needs of the American people in terms of their health, their safety, and their economic well-being, related to lowering the high cost of living, as opposed to allowing tens of millions of Americans to experience dramatically increased healthcare costs. What we will not do is support a partisan Republican spending bill that continues to gut the healthcare of the American people. Over the last several months, Republicans have created a healthcare crisis in the United States of America. Largest cut to Medicaid in American history, triggering the possibility of a $536 billion cut to Medicare if Congress does not act, because of what happened with the One Big Ugly Bill. Republicans have refused to extend the Affordable Care Act tax credits, and as a result of that, millions of working class Americans are going to experience skyrocketing premiums, copays, and deductibles at a time when America is already too expensive. Hospitals are closing. Nursing homes are closing. Community-based health centers are closing because of what Republicans have done in their One Big Ugly Bill.
This goes to show you what happens with politics when people have their egos involved. All these people are elected to be representatives of the people. And because their egos get involved, their personal opinions get involved, they start catering to their own agendas and forgetting the people that voted them into office. Now, for a lot of people in these districts, some of them have government jobs. That means if there's no funding, these people would, if they do go to work, are essentially working for free. Now, the way our bills work is that if you don't get paid, you know, your landlord don't get paid, but your landlord still expects his money, whether there's a government shutdown or not. So these people, they get so stuck on pontificating, if you will. It sounds really good. They make it seem like they have this moral high ground where they're doing this for the people, and in actuality, their salaries are paid. You know what I mean? Like, they're getting paid to essentially bring the government to gridlock and not to do anything. And it's really frustrating to see this thing into action, because you're asking, wondering, like, what are they actually doing up there? It's not representing the people. It's not helping the people, right? And so, you know, if this is only a couple of days, maybe it doesn't make that much of an effect. But if this drags on, it just means that for a lot of people, they get behind on their bills. And for a lot of people who already live in check to check, this doesn't bode well for them. But a lot of these politicians will continue to just pontificate. They'll continue to just filibuster and tell you a story about why their moral high ground is so necessary. And in reality, it's like, it's really not necessary. They can come to the table and get a temporary bill passed, or divide up their issues into individual issues, and just maybe even fund certain segments of the government while they argue over bigger parts. And it's sometimes strategically put in to a bigger thing, because they know they can't come into agreement if that thing is presented alone by itself. But if it's jumbled into everything else, like funding for schools and other things, those are critical things. So it's like putting somebody's feet to the fire when it comes to that. But, you know, to hear this guy talk, it's just like garbage. You know, it stands on nothing. There's no like connection to the implications and the hardship that this issue will have on people in their lives. He's just talking because his salary is getting paid, so he could care less, you know, if the people who actually vote him into play are affected about this negatively.
The Centers for Disease Control are under attack in the appropriation bill that Republicans have put forth in this month. The National Institute of...
I don't really care if the Center for Disease Control is under attack. I mean, they're doing research, but these are the same people that told you there was COVID and everybody had to take a shot and mandated everyone to do that. Do you think I care if their funding stops? No. Most 99% of the people who have been bamboozled by these people in the past could care less if they're not getting funding. That shouldn't stop a school from getting funding. That shouldn't stop, you know, people's access to state parks or the more critical infrastructure things that's necessary from actually happening. You know, this guy wants to talk about the Center for the Disease Control. He wants to bring up climate change in this moment. Like, what are we talking about? This is foolishness. You know what I mean?
Health under attack because of what Republicans have done in their appropriations bill this month. And they're limiting the ability of children and families to get vaccines. This is a five-alarm fire.
Who cares about the
vaccine? In terms of the Republican-caused healthcare crisis. And that's why Democrats are determined to turn things around.
This game.
Again, a lot of foolishness.
Some of the riders that Donald Trump's Republicans are pressing for include permanent extension of 2017 tax cuts, border security funding, healthcare funding cuts. Republicans have proposed cuts to healthcare programs, which Democrats strongly oppose, and tariff authority, which prevents Congress from blocking emergency declarations that allow President Trump to impose tariffs on Canada, Mexico, and potentially other nations. Well, the immediate impact would be that thousands of federal workers could be furloughed or required to work without pay. Some services pause, others continue. Primarily essential services remain. Airlines warn a shutdown could slow flights. Controllers and TSA will have to work, but without pay. Training and certification work will halt, possibly causing delays. Past shutdowns hit U.S. GDP slightly. Lost pay, slowed government contracts, delayed permits and inspections. The 2019 partial shutdown showed measurable drag on activity. Some benefit programs continue. For example, Social Security checks already authorized, but others include new processing, claim reviews, certain grants can slow.
This is the implication.
But is this the first time the U.S. is staring at a shutdown? Not really. Congress has flirted with shutdowns several times, but actual multi-day shutdowns have been fewer. Since 1977, there have been 10 shutdowns. In the last 5 years, there were close calls and short funding fights, but not a full year shutdown. Why does this happen every year? A shutdown isn't automatic. It's a political outcome of Congress not finishing appropriations by the fiscal year end, September 30. Leaders attach policy riders or use CR negotiations to extract political wins.
We have disagreements about tax policy, but you don't shut that government down. We have disagreements about healthcare policy, but you don't shut the government down. You don't use your policy disagreements as leverage to not pay our troops, to not have essential services of government actually function. You don't say the fact that you disagree about a particular tax provision is an excuse for shutting down the people's government and all the essential services that come along with it.
Bottom line is, a shutdown is possible if Congress fails to act, and it would have real effects on millions of workers and services at home, with knock-on ripples abroad. And the clock is ticking.
So there you have it. That's what's going on with that. Now let's jump into another quick video that talks about what's happening. Today's the official day. So these were videos leading up to it, but today's the official day where the shutdown takes effect. So let's see what's being impacted.
To reach a funding deal by Wednesday's midnight deadline. Now, roughly 750,000 federal workers are expected to be furloughed or fired. Democrats are demanding health care funding while Republicans refuse to negotiate.
So you see, because these guys want to take a stance on CDC funding and all this foolishness, it now gives the Trump administration the opportunity to cut back on government jobs, which he already has a mandate to, and support from the U.S. Supreme Court. So that means there's a possibility of 700,000. We're not going to say all of them, but let's just say 10% of those people, 70,000 people, 100,000 people that could potentially lose their job as a result of these guys and their own personal agendas and vendettas against Trump or against the Republicans, not to work together to do that. Now, to me, this is dangerous precedence. You know, you have these elected officials. Their job is to empower people. Their job is to support their constituents, but they're not. They're letting their ego get in the way. To me, there's a lesson about that. You know, pride comes before the fall. And a lot of times when people's egos get involved, they don't focus on the implications that it has on others. It's unfortunate that these people potentially face that because, you know, Trump may decide to cut back on some jobs. And now that's going to increase the unemployment rate, which means now the Department of Labor is going to have to issue higher amounts of unemployment income. But that then is one of the funding that needs to be approved because, you know, all the employment commissions throughout the various states need to get that federal funding from the government in order to do that, because essentially they all collect state income taxes from employers, and then a good portion of that goes to the government where it's kept in a, you know, almost a escrow account, and then it gets redistributed to the states depending on where we are in the job market. And essentially, you know, with these cuts is just going to contribute to that. And then it's still going to now, for the people to even get unemployment to pay off their bills and handle their business and live their lives, they're still going to need some sort of resolution to happen in Congress and in the Senate. So again, this is one of those things that continues to go around and around in circles. Now, if you're a contractor of any sort, that also holds up your money because the funding has to be released from the federal government in order for you to provide the services through these agencies that you may work for. So this is not good for anybody on any side of the thing. So I'm hopeful that these guys can put their pride aside and they can come to the table to, if nothing else, pass an interim bill that allows some funding for the core essential things necessary for government to function to go into effect. But if they don't, it affects everything. It affects your flights. There's federal agencies that actually manage air traffic controls and things of that nature. If those people are not working, who's manning the flight coordinations and things of that nature? How many of those people are going to keep showing up to work to ensure that you make your flight? So something as small as this has real world implications where you may have no connection to government. You may not even care about government much. You may not be a political person, but these decisions ultimately will affect your life if now this shutdown can impose how many people actually work in the airline industry. And you may just have a flight scheduled and that's now delayed due to this issue. So something to think about and something to ensure that people are aware of what's going on so that they can put the feet to the fire on their politicians by calling them, contacting them, and letting them know that there's real world implications. And if they're not willing to be a representation of the people, then you have to go in another direction. They have to feel that their job is threatened so that they do the right thing by the people, not for their own self-interest.
This is the third shutdown under Trump's presidency. Scripps News Deputy Political Director Joe St. George joins us now live from Capitol Hill. Joe, I guess we can't say this was a surprise.
100%, right? This was the ticking time bomb that was ticking in the background of all of the news that was happening throughout the month of September, and it exploded last night. I mean, it's been nearly 7 years since we've been here, but we are here, and there's no telling how long this shutdown will last. The one in 2018, which stretched into 2019, lasted 35 days. Going back to the late 1970s, the average shutdown is 8 days. Although, yes, I think history can be used as a bit of a barometer. It's important to know your history. But we could be dealing with a very different set of political realities here in 2025. For one, President Trump is threatening a reduction in force, mass firings of federal workers during this shutdown. There's this sense in Washington that President Trump believes he has more authority to carry out some ambition, some goals of his during this shutdown. So far, it's just a threat. That'll be the big storyline our political team will be watching all day. Does that threat actually get carried out or not? You cited a study, an analysis from the Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, which said 750,000 federal workers could be furloughed. But a furlough is different than a firing, right? I mean, a firing is permanent loss of your job. A furlough is you're just off for the time being. This morning, from coast to coast, millions of federal workers are saying, am I essential? Am I not essential? What about our next paycheck? Now, the good news for federal workers is they just got paid last week. So there's some wiggle room here. The next key date to watch is October 10th. That's the next scheduled paycheck for federal workers. And right now, that's not going to happen. New laws do guarantee back pay, but there's no guarantee how long it will take to get to that part of the debate. If you're just getting caught up, after all.
Oh, great. A request for a new video. Now to rely on 1,000 people to get it done. Or you can just use Riverside and do it yourself.
For so many years, we talked about looming government shutdowns. For so many years, there was threats of government shutdowns. And then in the 11th hour, lawmakers came together. This is the first time, right? A lot of people may be paying attention and trying to get caught up on what exactly is causing this shutdown. Here's it. I'm going to break it down real quick for you. Republicans are saying, look, let's keep the government funded at current levels, make some slight policy changes related to member security, but nothing controversial. Let's kick the can down the road to November and talk more about this at a later date. Democrats are saying, no. You need our votes, Republicans, in order to keep the government open, or in this case now, reopen the government. And that's true. Republicans can't do this by themselves. They need some Democrats to help them in the U.S. Senate. And Democrats are saying we need to have a discussion about health care. One area of health care policy that Democrats are talking about is Affordable Care Act health subsidies expiring at the end of this year. Democrats believe this will raise premiums for millions of Americans. They have leverage now. They certainly feel they have leverage now. And they're clearly executing that leverage and trying to get Republicans to extend these subsidies. For the moment, Republicans have issues with those subsidies, unwilling to give that concession to Democrats. So if you're just getting caught up, that's what this shutdown is all about. And here on Capitol Hill, both sides are blaming each other. Take a listen.
Republicans are plunging America into a shutdown, rejecting bipartisan talks, pushing a partisan bill, and risking America's health care.
The Democrat caucus here in town, in the Senate, has chosen to shut down the government over a clean, nonpartisan funding bill. That's right, a clean, nonpartisan funding bill. We didn't ask Democrats to swallow any new Republican policies.
I think we've got to stay laser focused on 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, because what is President Trump's thinking today, tomorrow, next week with this shutdown? No one's expecting this shutdown to be solved on day one. Is the president welcoming this fight? Is he going to try to use this to his political advantage, terminate some policies that he hinted to yesterday in the Oval Office during this shutdown? Does the president grow tired of this shutdown? Does he feel like he's getting blamed at all? Now, he told Politico yesterday that he doesn't think he's going to be blamed. He thinks Democrats are going to be blamed here. But does President Trump give at all? The off-ramp here for him is just to keep these current subsidies in place that Democrats are asking for. It's a relative easy ask compared to other shutdowns we've seen in the past. For instance, in 2013, that shutdown. Republicans wanted the Affordable Care Act repealed. Well, that was something that President Obama at the time was never going to do. This is a much smaller ask. But you ask Republicans here on Capitol Hill, again, they have issues with these subsidies. Here's what the president said yesterday about the benefits of a shutdown.
A lot of good can come down from shutdowns. We can get rid of a lot of things that we didn't want, and they'd be Democrat things.
A lot of good can come potentially from a shutdown here. The old expression on Capitol Hill is it's easier to get into a shutdown than out of one. Why? Because both sides will want to win the political game. And in doing so and trying to accomplish that, there's going to be a lot of media press conferences throughout the day. Republicans are going to go back to the Senate floor later today and try to pass their bill out to reopen the government. They need 5 Democrats to join them. Now, important note, Holly, yesterday on the vote to keep the government open, the Republican bill, 3 Democrats did join Republicans to vote to keep the government open. That's noteworthy. Senator John Fetterman of Pennsylvania was one of them. Senator Cortez Masto of Nevada was one of them. It shows you that not every Democrat in Washington is on board with this strategy of healthcare fight for this shutdown. So that's one of the many storylines we'll be watching on this day one of the first government shutdown in nearly 7 years, Holly.
Joe, so many questions for you, but let's start with this one. So I have heard lawmakers, Democratic lawmakers say, when questioned about perhaps firings during this shutdown, look, this is nothing new. He's been doing it. The president, his administration have been firing federal workers since January. This is just a long line in that same script of that same play. But now we also know that unions have filed a lawsuit to block any firings ahead of time. So where does that all stand, and what might we expect in that arena?
That's 100% right, because a lot of the firings have already happened, right? Elon Musk and Doge took care of some earlier this year. And what was the storyline the last several weeks, early September? We started to hear reports out of government agencies that certain departments needed more workers because they realized they were understaffed. So this threat of terminations is unclear at this juncture. The president said yesterday, notice what he said, Democratic policies could be going out. Yes, if there's certain departments and agencies that he feels as though really needs reforms or still needs reforms, they may use this as an opportunity. But the government has a lot of responsibilities. And in many cases, Doge already took care of the low-hanging fruit. So we'll see what this threat actually ends up being. Democrats clearly are calling the president's bluff on this one. I think this is going to come down to phone calls. Who gets blamed here? There's some light polling out in the last 24 hours that shows the majority of America, or want to backtrack that. Light polling out in the last 24 hours that shows slightly more Americans are blaming Republicans than Democrats. But a good chunk of the country this morning is just waking up and realizing what this fight is all about. I mean, let's face it, Holly, how many times in recent years have we done the story of a looming government shutdown or threat of a government shutdown, and then the 11th hour, there's a deal. A lot of Americans are tuning this out until this morning, when they're now very much laser focused on tuning this in to see, okay, how is my life impacted here? Look, Social Security checks still go out. Medicare still continues, right? So for many Americans, you may not feel the impact of this shutdown right away, but if you're having trouble making a phone call to the IRS in a couple weeks or getting an appointment at a Social Security office in a couple weeks, that's when this begins to impact more Americans. Again, day one impacts are usually limited in government shutdowns. Trash isn't going to pile up at a national park because the government's been shut down for a couple hours. But come day 7, day 8, day 9, that's when it becomes much more noticeable.
Yeah, especially financially for a lot of people. If you're not getting that paycheck, you still have bills to pay, mortgage to pay, rent to pay, buying groceries. I mean, so in a week or two, this is when, you're right, it may all come to a head. And it'll be interesting to see, though, then the financial fallout and the pressure it puts on these politicians. So, all right, we have a lot of questions, but we have all morning to talk to you. So I look forward to the next time we chat. Scripps News Deputy Political Director Joe St. George for us. And who knows, in an hour, things may change. We just don't know, but we'll see you then.
This is a moving football. Good morning, Holly. We'll see you later.
Okay. So there you have it. hopefully you guys got something out of this video, just seeing what this impact is going to be. You do have a say in this. As a voter, you have a right to call your representative and to let them know,
if you live in a Virginia zip code,
and to let them know how you feel about what's happening. So I would certainly recommend that you do your part and, voice to your representatives what you feel about this shutdown and get them to the table to hopefully solve the problem. Otherwise, it may get worse before it gets better. All right, guys, thank you for joining us. If you're not already connected to the Inner Core Show, I ask that you like and subscribe and, comment, share the video, but also let your voice be heard. The key is to have dialogue and to get feedback from different places and different people. And, until we meet again, I wish you all the best.